Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this latest webinar for the Community Builders Facebook group. Can I ask you before, the first thing is please can everyone mute their microphones so we can avoid any extraneous noises that will override my introduction or cars, any kind of heavy machinery in the background. That'd be great. So it's going to be, I can imagine it'll be quite a busy webinar today. There are going to be people going to be streaming in. I think we had about 73 people register, which is a record for this fledgling webinar series. And for those of you who do webinars, my rule of thumb is usually about a 50% turnout. Maybe we'll get 30 people on here, which makes it also a challenge because today one of the sort of intentions with these webinars is trying to make them as interactive as possible so we can have a bit of a conversation. So the first thing that I would like to do is do a little bit of housekeeping so everyone can get a feel for how this webinar is going to interact and how you can interact with our guest Charles, who I will introduce in a few minutes. For those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, there is a way to raise your hand in the, well, if you're on the desktop, there should be an option to go into the chat, and then there's a little selection of options where you can either say yes, no, go slower, go faster, and also a button that says more, I think some of you have, and there should be something like a raising of hands. Is anyone able to raise their hand on this call so I can just see if there are any hand raisers? Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for me to pick out who you are.
It's under participants, not chat.
Thank you, Don. There you go. Boom. That's collective responsibility in action. Brilliant. Hey, we are having people raising their hands. If you are on a mobile device, I'm hoping it's also under participants, and you will be able to see the raised hand. I see many of you are not on video. I'm assuming you're either somewhere compromising or driving a car or something. If you can't raise your hand electronically or digitally, just raise your hand on screen, and Brooke will help me to identify who wants to ask a question or say anything next. Great. Also, in the meantime, actually, it'd be nice to get a feel while I'm giving you a bit of a intro and doing the housekeeping stuff. There's a little poll that hopefully should have appeared on screen, just to give a feel for who's in the room. It'll help, I think, Charles know where to pitch the conversations and the answers that he'll be giving, and also helps us know, who's interested in these webinars, and hopefully give us a feel again of how to curate the content that we'll be creating, and what other guests we'd like to introduce to these calls. Great. So I will give you a minute to do that. So you've got another 20 seconds. There's 7 of you still to vote. And I'm going to let Nancy come in as well. In the meantime, like I said, we're going to have initial introduction to Charles. I want to give an introduction to him. So for those of you who don't know Charles Vogl, I'll tell you a bit more about him. He'll talk a little bit about why he's here, and I'll tell you why. For us, it's really about his book, The Art of Community, and also the knowledge that he has around community building, which I believe will help all of us in all our efforts, whether you're running online, offline communities, or just curious about the whole community building approach. And then if you have any questions that spring up while we're actually talking, if you could either raise your hand if you want to ask those questions face-to-face or live, or post a question within the chat, and then Brooke will try and identify any questions, and she can tell me who to go to next in terms of getting you to ask your question, and hopefully that will spark some conversations and some thoughts. The webinar is going to be up to an hour long, so we've got about 50 minutes left. So to give you an idea of the length of time that we're going to be here. So, excellent. I'm going to stop that poll now that I've finished speaking. Let's see, for those of you, so you can see we've got most of you are either running an online or offline community. So you're in the right place if you're a community builder. We have a lot of you who are entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs as well. So hopefully, Charles, that gives you a feel for people in the room. What would be also nice in the chat, if you could just, I think some of you already started saying hello, say where you're calling in from. So it'd be good to get a nice idea of the spread of geographies where people are in the world who are joining with us. I think we're going to have quite an international bunch of people here. Thank you. All right, that's the boring stuff over and done with. Let's get into the reason you're all here. And I'm going to do a quick little intro. I have a nice written intro for me. So I try and do this. I've done this off the cuff in the past and failed miserably. Then I've always asked the speaker, who's the guest, to introduce themselves. But then Charles reminded me, actually, you should be introducing this person. You're the one who invited him. And he gave me something to read, which is hopefully a lot more clearer than I would try and make up myself. So here, Charles supports leaders in technology, finance, and government to grow more effectively in creating change. And he draws on principles from 3,000 years of spiritual traditions, and he teaches how to build critical connections for leadership and impact generation. So Charles, in his 20s, was in the US Peace Corps in northern Namibia. They witnessed inspirational community inside his rural village. And after Peace Corps, founded Broken English Productions in New York City. His PBS projects touch on topics such as education, school reform, and civil rights advocacy. He has a film, New Year Baby, and it tells the story of Cambodian genocide survivors. The film won many awards, including the Amnesty International prestigious Movies That Matter Award. He's a regular guest lecturer at Yale, where he earned his Master of Divinity. His first book, The Art of Community, is a book which I just read recently, and it's one of the reasons that I thought Charles would be a great person to have on board. He shares how both community and belonging can be built through time-tested ideas and rituals. And I think Fabian, I believe, shared a post on the Facebook group recently about these aren't new things to learn, these are things that we should be remembering in terms of bringing people together and the whole idea about community. And so his book is a guide to creating meaningful communities that enrich both individuals and humanity. And it won the Nicholas Book Award for Business and Leadership Writing. Boom. So that hopefully is giving you, if you didn't know who Charles was before, that's going to give you a very good. He has a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge around this area. And I'm really grateful to have you on board, Charles. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to talk with people who are actually voting with your time that you want to get better bringing people together. I think everybody on this call probably knows, at least intuitively, if not explicitly, that we may be living in the loneliest time in Western history. And the trend is we're getting worse. And the things that got us here are actually getting stronger. Well, I'm really pessimistic about where we're going to go for the next 10 years. What I am optimistic about is that there are those of us who can do something where we are. And a big part of that is just understanding what's going on and what we can do. And everybody here is voting with your eyeballs that you want to do something. So this is exciting for me.
Nice. So when we first talked about doing this webinar, I think, and we were thinking about ideas to cover, and given the time span we have, there was a few things that I was quite interested in running an online community. And it was this idea of who's in and who's out. And then when you do have people in the community, there's the kind of, to some level, different levels of relationship, I think. You called them inner rings, and I'm not, again, this is my understanding of it. So for people who are building communities, and I would assume some people say, everyone is allowed in, everyone can be part of my community. That can be a challenge, or not necessarily a great strategy.
Yeah, I don't even think that's an effective community. So I don't know how familiar those of you on the call are with my work. In the art of community, for the purposes of giving and making the pedagogy accessible, I talk about 7 principles that have been around for no less than 3,000 years that at least spiritual traditions have been using to bring people together and keep them connected, even through existentially threatening times. And what Carlos has referred to is the idea of the boundary. There must be a boundary. It's very difficult, I would say impossible, to create close, tight-knit, strong bonds with people in your community if you don't know who's in the community. And if you know who's in the community, that means there's somebody who's not in the community, which means there are people on the outside. Now, whenever I say that, somebody is thinking or says out loud, Charles, boundaries are evil. People who build boundaries are evil. And since you tell people to build boundaries, you must be evil. And that's entirely possible. I may be evil. But consider that you want to build, I'm presuming everybody on this call wants to build community for some reason. And when we're talking about an organizational community or so-called brand community, a community connected to a brand, right? And so entrepreneurship, if you have a name, if people can recognize you and you're not just bicyclists, right? You need to have two things going. And one is you need to have shared values. Now, maybe not all your values, but there needs to be a shared value, like you want to build community, or you're entrepreneurs who are risking somebody's capital and your time and opportunity costs to create something that doesn't exist. Whatever it is, there better be a shared value. And the second thing is you need to have a shared purpose, right? Like maybe you all like to be entrepreneurs, but somebody shows up and all they really want to do is sell their wares at meetings. Well, I don't know how much you want to include them if really what they want to do is just get better at pitching what they're selling to you. That gets really old really quickly. So usually, if your community is going to have any strengths, there's going to be somebody in the world that doesn't share those, what we call core values, what are the required values to be part of this, to be part of the conversation, and doesn't share your purpose. That doesn't make them bad people. Doesn't mean you don't talk to them. Doesn't mean you go out and you treat them poorly. It just means they're not a fit for what you're doing. And of course, you can have fairly broad purpose and values, and then a lot more people can fit. But at the end of the day, you need to understand that there's somebody in the planet that shouldn't be hanging out with you, at least in these community events. Because in order for community to work, there needs to be a safe inside. In order to create the more intimate, more connected connections on the inside of a community, which makes it a community and not just another seat at Starbucks, there needs to be a place where it's safe to express those values and work on that purpose, where you don't have to explain yourself to people who don't share that, where people can understand you in ways that you don't have to explain that or defend it at every moment. And we can't make that space safe or safe enough for those intimate connections if it's just full of people who don't share the values and share the purpose, right? So that's what I mean by that. And I know that some people are quick to jump to the fact that, to the idea that if you have a boundary, that must mean you treat people outside the boundary poorly. And that's not what it means at all. You know, I write books, and there is a community of book writers here in the East Bay, in the San Francisco area. I don't find people who don't write books and treat them poorly. I don't not talk to them. But when I get together with other thought leader authors and we talk about how the world is changing and how we're trying to be relevant in it, guess what? We have conversations that don't apply to people who haven't spent 150 hours trying to write a thought leadership book that enriches people in more than one time zone, right? So I hope that helps respond to that, Carlos.
No, that's perfect. I think maybe there's an opportunity here. If anyone has any questions or thoughts around creating boundaries. So the things that came up for me is like, without a boundary, you can't have safety within that space. And that the idea of the boundary is to create an area where you know that people inside are like-minded, are like you. And they're
like-minded within the boundaries of the community, right? Because we're not setting up, I just want to be clear about that, because there's a mistake thinking, well, gee, I want everybody to be like me, or we need to be entirely alike. And if I like to wear blue jeans and you like to wear khakis, that doesn't mean we can't be in an entrepreneurship community together, right? And the mistake comes when we say, well, gee, we're creating an entrepreneurship community. What we're really doing is creating a community of people who like to read what I read, watch TV shows that I watch, and like to eat what I eat. And so one of the things you can ask yourself, there's no one magic answer, is, well, what are the core values? What is the core purpose you have to be connected to? And then decide how to let it go. And when we don't do that, that's how we exclude people who, and it really doesn't matter. We exclude people when the reason we're excluding them has nothing to do with the core purpose, right? And to just more clarify the idea of the boundary, this applies to online communities. There needs to be a boundary people have to step through, usually with a click, to get on the inside. And if you don't have that, if everything is public all the time, you're going to have something, right? It might be a helpful forum. It might be a place where people connect and find other people of similar interest. But without that boundary to make it a private space, you're not going to have the growth of that mutual concern at the same rate, certainly, which makes a community. And for the purposes of my work, I define a community as a group of people who share mutual concern for one another, right? So somebody has a database question, I can answer it. That doesn't mean we're not connected. That doesn't mean I haven't helped you. But if we're just simply transactionally sharing information for the purposes of my work, that's not a community.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it bad. And I would call that a group in the nomenclature I'm using. Groups are not bad. Groups can be very helpful. Groups can be life-saving and job-saving. But that's not the work that I'm doing. I'm helping people create connections and help them feel understood, understand they belong, and quite frankly, help each other when times get tough, far beyond when it's just convenient.
So I think it's going back to that very clear use of the language so that people know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Talking with you about community.
Yeah.
So I see, Don, you have your hand up. You wanted to ask a question. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and share your question.
Hi, Charles. Thanks for being here with us. I enjoyed your book and enjoying your book. Yeah, you answered partly the boundary issue of how you filter. So yes, my community does have a gateway in the sense that people have to join and they can answer questions. My concern as a social entrepreneur is, as I've been wrestling with, is the sort of the levels of commitment using dollars as a filter. So, there's sort of having a group of people in your community who are supportive and have core value, but aren't nearly as deeply committed as people who might want to. Do you understand my question?
I don't understand your question. I understand that you want to have some kind of filter and it involves dollars.
Well, yeah, and in the community you can, like I have a course where I have students, and then I have a mentorship where I have people I mentor one-to-one, and we do more intense work. So the mentees pay more money than the students do. But then I look at a third level of, I'd like to have people in my community who maybe aren't students, or they've been students, but they don't want to go on and be mentors. And so I'm just trying to find the money part, because that seems to always be a challenging part. I would like to think our community is spiritually oriented, and so money always seems to just be a little bit more of a sticky thing.
All right. Well, if I understood the question correctly, you have several inner rings, and there are different privileges within the inner rings. And for those of you who haven't read the book, Inner Rings is one of the chapters of Art of Community. And within different inner rings, you typically have people of different maturity levels or different interests, right? And most mature communities eventually develop inner rings, formally or informally. And it's great if it's formal, then someone can use them as an aspirational tool for their maturation, right? So if I'm a bicyclist, the first day I'm bicycling, people are inviting me on century rides. Once I get in century rides, then maybe I can be invited into the Cross the Rockies ride, yada, yada. Okay, but the first day, people aren't inviting me to do a multi-day trips across the Rockies, right? I'm not part of that inner ring. And there's two things that you mentioned. One is how do you use money? And the second one is how do you, use money when you have what you generally call a spiritually oriented community. So there are a couple issues to touch. I can't tell you what to do because I don't know you and I don't know them. And I just want to be clear about that you're not confused that I have lots of hubris and I think I know things that I obviously don't know. But we can talk about principles. So one of them is, money is just one way of committing. And if people have money, great. Unfortunately, in the United States, the vast majority of Americans don't have money. In fact, it's startling how much money they don't have. And so when we ask people to put up money, we're asking most of Americans to do something that they largely can't. Now, that's an entirely appropriate filter if that's an appropriate filter for your group, right? If it's a Nepalese mountain climbing community and you can't put in $100 for dues, then the chances that you're going to travel to Nepal to hike a mountain are pretty low, right? But we just need to understand that you've got to ask the question, who am I keeping out, and do I want to keep them out if I make it a money filter, right? And I can't know the answer, but there are people you're keeping out, which would be largely most Americans, right? The second, away from a transactional relationship. Now, communities that do stuff, that have a hosted space, they need, wait, it says I'm muted for some reason.
No, you're unmuted now. You accidentally got muted.
Okay. There are costs, right? Offering coffee at a coffee event costs. There's nothing wrong with making sure that there's a way that can be funded appropriately. The principle we want to make sure that we steer away from is we accidentally turn the community into a so-called transactional relationship. If you do this or you pay this, you get this. And then it draws away from the part where there's a relational investment in the members. Let me give you an example. This year, I visited and eventually applied to join, I'll call them an Oakland Adventure Club that has a 40-person lodge in Tahoe, California. And they've been around since the 30s. And they don't have enough membership. And so they're looking for a new membership. And when I went through their process of applying and being selected, it became clear that they've made a lot of rules about how you become a member. How many times you have to visit, who has to sign off, what you have to pay, where to put your boots, where to put your bag, when you arrive. There's just oodles of rules. And in the balance of the experience, there's very little of the experience, which is, hey, I'm a member of this club and I like to go to the mountains and spend time in the mountains, and you're a person who likes to spend time in the mountains and do the driving and spend the money. Let us be connected. There is above zero part of that, but the experience is largely you need to know the rules, you need to pay the fees, and you need to do the check boxes. Well, guess what? It's largely a transactional membership now. If you do the rules and you pay the money, you get to use the lodge. No surprise that one of their challenges is getting young people involved, young people meaning under 60. And when they do get involved, getting them to spend time to connect with other members. And of course, I'm an expert in community, and I explained this to the head of membership, who's a volunteer. And it was the first time that someone had ever brought up the fact that you've structured this so it's transactional, and then you're complaining that people just treat it as a club where they can use the lodge. Okay? Which is simply to say they didn't understand that principle, and they drove the car into transactional and then had the results of that. Now, I don't know where the magic line is where it stops being relational and transactional. I don't know what rules they should not bring up until much later when they've invested in race lately. I don't know what's appropriate for you, but you need to understand that is a real line, and then you complain about the fact that, gee, this isn't a real community, it's just a trade, right? And then lastly, historically, offering spiritual connection, spiritual growth, spiritual community, and then making that above a nominal expense has historically failed. I don't know if there's a profit motive in what you're doing, Don. I'm not saying it's bad to have a profit motive. I'm just saying that traditionally when there's a profit motive connected with honest spiritual growth, it usually ends unsatisfactorily or poorly. And we don't have to Google very long before you have a lot of examples of that. And I know that a lot of people are trying to find that magic formula, but as someone who's studied spiritual traditions for many years, I know there are a lot of warnings. And one of the reasons is when we have a commercial product, usually we're offering a benefit. You will feel better. You will get better at. You will no longer have this pain, whatever it is, in the world. In spiritual growth, usually it's about challenging the ego, challenging the status quo, calling us to growth into something that's more than what we're comfortable with now. And usually, if that's honest, there is some fair bit, if not enormous amount of discomfort or pain, right? And an asking of letting go of the old ways, the ways that we're comfortable with, in order to embrace something new. And historically, that happens in spiritual growth because there's a trust in the teacher that they know something or they know a path that will lead to something greater through letting something go usually with explicit or metaphorical pain. Often there's explicit, right? So fasts, hermitages, or if we look at the Native American traditions of going on long pilgrimages, right? Those are fundamentally uncomfortable, like legitimately painful. When we try to combine two models where one involves a spiritual teacher asking for trust to guide someone through pain and difficulty to find something they trust is new, and then the other model of promising they'll get benefits and feel better and lose pain, they don't mix well. There may be somebody who's figured it out, but I haven't heard of them. I mean, usually people who say they've figured it out, within 20 years, we find out there's real corruption there and it collapses. And there's been some real examples just in the last year on that. So those are the principles I can offer, Don. Of course, I don't know what you're doing and who you're doing it with and how you're offering it. So please don't interpret this as any judgment or knowledge about what you're doing right or wrong.
Just a quick thank you very much. You defined a really key issue that I teach herbalism and it's a trade. And so but the community aspect makes the teaching much more dynamic. But I hear you really clearly. I've been in my own spiritual tradition for almost 50 years and just what you're saying. So thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Delighted to help.
We have another question. Do you want to do Peter's question?
We have Pukraj or Rajan. Pukraj or Peter's. I was going to go for Pukraj first and then go to Peter.
Perfect.
So with Pukraj, we had his question was, what happens if you started with quite an open? This is me interpreting. So Pukraj, please let me know if you would like to answer your question yourself live. Please unmute yourself if you feel comfortable to do that. Otherwise, I will try and interpret it as much as I can. Oh, he's on the train. Okay, then. So basically, the way I understand it, he started off with quite an open community. So the boundaries, I assume, weren't quite as well defined. And now he wants to work on redefining a specific part of it. And so what steps to follow, and should we be creating that within the existing group? So it sounds like, how do you create boundaries that weren't necessarily boundaries before? So
because, again, there are many details that I don't know, like the cultural context, the expectation of people involved, and the aspirations of the community, I don't know what steps you should take. I will speak to principles that all of you who are much more familiar with your context can apply. And that's, I think, the best thing that I can do. So, one thing that occurs to me is when we want to bring you around a community and we want to make the boundaries more clear or stronger, there's a reason, which is to say there's a purpose. And we need to be clear what the purpose is. And we want to invite people inside who want to join us in that purpose. And not everybody in the world is going to want to join that purpose. We may not even know who's joining us for that purpose yet. And so that brings us to the principle of invitation. That's when we just invite people into our inner ring, right? And we make it invitation only to apply or to visit, right? Because when you look at the inner rings principle, not everybody who shows up to every meeting or every event or every hike or every dinner is of equal connection to the community. And if we pretend that's the case, then, well, we're not really helping anybody, right? We don't have mature members and novice members. So usually there's what we call the visitor stage, right? I don't know if I like you. I don't know if I like this. I don't know if I want to do it, but I can't know unless I visit. That would be a visitor ring. So you get to invite people into a visitor ring. Now, when you're starting at the beginning, it's still inchoate. You still don't know what people like, why they might like it, what you think they'll like, and you're wrong, right? Maybe you think that 3-hour dinners on Thursday night is the best thing ever. It turns out that nobody with kids can ever come to anything on Thursday night. They certainly can't stay for 3 hours, right? I don't know. I'm just making that up, but you might discover that. So then you might find out it should be at Saturdays from noon to 1. And maybe that's not good enough because it's hard to have a deep conversation in an hour when you start everything 10 minutes late. My point is, you don't know. So you get to invite people in to be what we call founding members. And usually you don't want more than 6 of them. And together you talk through and experiment. Well, what is it we're trying to create that serves the purpose we're coming together? And you may have a general sense of what values are bringing you together, but you may not have articulated them. Or it might be that you're wrong. And I'll give you an example. I spoke to somebody who talked about how important her book club was. And there are 6 of them, and they're a sort of community, she said. And then at some point, the 6 of them had some real challenges in their life, I think sickness in their family. And the book became not that important, like what book they were reading. And it turns out that some members would not show up to the meeting if they hadn't done the reading because these challenges in life were taking them over. And the members realized they didn't want other members not showing up because they didn't do the reading. The reading wasn't as important as the friendship. And I asked this question. I said, if you or your husband get a cancer diagnosis tomorrow, and you make one phone call to this book club and say, I'm going to be in the ICU for next week. I need help feeding my family. Will your family get fed? And she said, absolutely. And I said, well, there's nothing sort of about a community in this book club. It's absolutely a community. You care about each other. It turns out you don't care about the book that much. You don't care that much about the reading. What you really care about is you have friends that support each other, even when really important challenges show up. And until that conversation, she had never reflected on that. They thought it was a book club. And there's nothing wrong with book club, and book clubs are great, and I'm glad she had a book club. But they hadn't realized that, when things got tough, they weren't that interested in books. So you may find something else, right? And that's fine. It's called maturity, right? The group matured to serve them as their lives changed. And the relationships became much more prominent. So, one principle is find your core members of your founding members, and then find out what you like to do and articulate for yourselves over the time it takes to figure out, well, what are the core values that bring you together, and why do you want to come together? And by the way, just having friends that help each other make life work totally counts, right? There are people who just want to go to groups to sell more real estate, or to brag about who they know, or to possibly get leads for investors. They are not there to build friendships, support each other for the rest of their lives. They're there to get leads. They should not be in your group, at least after they visited, right? So I hope that's helpful. And then you get to, once you have a core group, then you get to choose who do we continue to invite in to visit to see if they want to grow as we're growing.
Cool. Excellent. I have this image now. You have this larger collective, but then you're growing something from the inside that's more well defined based on these initial founding members, or these people who are quite close to you.
Yeah, and you want there to be some distinguishing something between the smaller group and the larger collective. And quite frankly, just not knowing anything about this particular case, but thinking in generally, how wonderful it would be to invite others to create their own inner rings, right? I might create an East Bay inner ring. It would be great if there's a Menlo Park inner ring and a Seattle inner ring. You don't have to call them inner rings. Inner ring is the principle, right? You can call it club, chapter, group, huddle, inner group, whatever. But this idea is you recognize we cannot have deep, intimate relationships with 150 people, right? That's just exhausting. The math doesn't work, right? How many vulnerable conversations a month can I have with 150 people, right? And if you want a greater collective to have that, it's important to have other inner rings so that they can have what we call an intimate experience. Because the intimate experience is what provides the conversations that create the connections. And if you're not inviting people to have those intimate experiences in a small enough group, they're not having it. And you more or less have a list of people as opposed to a community.
Nice. Excellent. Thanks, Charles. That's great. I think, Bookraj is helping him reflect on his current case. So Peter would like to know, he'd love to hear more about the connection between boundaries and this whole application onboarding process to the community. Peter, would you like to expand more, or are you happy for me again to try and interpret where this question is coming from?
No, I think that's about it. I think, Charles, you touched on some of those things kind of passingly already. They definitely connect to what you just said. So I say keep it nice and broad, then it applies to everyone.
Well, I'll speak to so there are communities. As you heard, I'm writing a whole book on this. That are not really communities; they're just resources, a resource board. For example, there might be a place where you can go and ask questions about Zoom and somebody will answer it. That doesn't necessarily make it a community. It doesn't make it bad. It can be really helpful, but it's not a community. If what you're really interested in is creating a place where people generate or develop mutual concern for one another, then when we think about onboarding an application, there's a couple of principles to think about. And one is we connect with other people, not with a bunch of text, right, or video. And so, where possible, ensure that there's an inner ring. If you read the book, Art of Community, then a diaconate, we call it, people who have more authority within the community than other people, that will connect, i.e. greet visitors or novices, so that they do have a point of connection, right? The biggest mistake, we're in a world where people who have online communities want to make it as easy as possible, as scalable, as fast as possible, and that means as hands-off as possible. You can totally do that. And you're absolutely going to get results consistent with that. Because if I throw a birthday party and I want to make it as cheap as possible, as scalable as possible, and as easy as possible, and that means there's nobody who's going to talk to you when you show up, you're going to come to a big scale party and you're going to have a connection consistent with my priorities. If I want you to feel connected to people at my party, it would make a big difference if there's at least 20% of the party that understands people show up and they look around and they're not talking to anybody, that you make sure that they get welcomed, that they have a point of connection, right? It's not as scalable as having nobody attend to that, right? Duh. It's also way better. And we talk about scaling community. We can't scale it at the same rate that we can scale things that don't need emotional investment. Because when you scale community, it's really scaling a pointillism of individual relationships. And relationships take time. And if anybody wants to disagree with me on that, look back across your life at all the relationships that have ever meant anything to you and tell me which ones you did quickly and meant the most. They don't exist. They just take time. And I can say, well, gee, let's get more intimate and powerful relationships for you. Let's have the time it took for you to create those relationships. And that's ridiculous, right? So if you really want to create community, make sure that there's someone who understand offering a real point of connection to incoming people is important and makes a big difference. Otherwise, you're sliding toward the transaction relationship. So there you go. That's one idea. And then another one, as far as the application process, right? There's no magical way to select the right people. And if there was, they'd be teaching that in the best business schools in the world. And it's a huge point of pain for everybody. But you can make clear the purpose of the group when people come in. And very often that isn't there. The example I like to give is if I hold a party and I say, Carlos, my wife and I are having people over on Friday. There's going to be beer and there's going to be pizza there. You should totally come. That's an invitation, right? And I don't know if Carlos is going to come. But I could say, hey, Carlos, every Friday night, my wife and I make an investment in our time to create relationships with people who live nearby so that we have a core group of friends that we can turn to whenever any of us have help or as we raise a family in the East Bay. And one of the ways we do that is we invite friends over. We're going to have beer. There'll probably be pizza. And we'd love for you to join us to experience that. Well, the difference is I told them why we're having beer and pizza. And I know that sounds really silly, at least it sounds silly to me, but most people leave out the purpose, right? I'm not telling you that you need to say the purpose every time in explicit ways so it becomes annoying, but this idea is that you become aware that if people don't know why you're gathering, they don't know, and they might have to guess. And then the other idea about onboarding people is we can say what our core values are all the time, right? But when people really get them is when they hear the stories about those of us who are connected. Because I could say that our values are integrity and friendliness and generosity, but if my stories are about how I was able to scam sales, and everybody's like, yeah, way to go, Charles. That's a good way to boost revenue. Then we know what our real values are. So thanks for listening.
No, that's great. There's something around core values where I heard was that you have to live them, not just laminate them. And that's what I see sometimes as a manifesto, but not actually being acted on. So we have another question from Christina. Christina, would you like to unmute yourself and share your question? Okay, I will try and ask it for you. Oh, she's on the train as well. There's a lot of commuters on this call. All right, she's been hired to introduce a paid membership model to an alumni community that was up until now free. She already feels the pain of this kind of economical transaction coming in. Do you have any best practices? I assume any stories may be related to this. She said the community is well-rounded, has common values, established boundaries, a shared mindset, and they do love each other. But I assume she's needing to get some money from them.
Yeah, well, obviously there's no one magic model. If it was, Christine would have Googled that, found it, and every university, every alumni group in the country would be using it. So I don't have any magical solution that isn't widely in the industry. What occurs to me is this idea that people seek out, join, and participate in the community because they're getting some kind of value. Now, that can be a transactional value, like I get cheaper tickets to stuff I want because I'm a member of my alumni group, or I get a discount on my cell phone because I'm in the alumni group. And that's one way to do it. The other way that for a strong community is reason people commit temporally and financially is it helps them grow into who they want to be. And I don't know how these alumni members want to grow into who they want to be. And one of those ways could be just more connected with people they think share their values. If that's the case, I hope those values are. My hope is that the expense to join the group is nominal enough that whatever value they're getting is far greater than the fees. And if it's not, you're going to get results consistent with that. Charging people for things that they want and getting the price right is not rocket science, but it can take experimentation. And if they actually understand on the other side of that, there's a way that they can grow into who they want to be, then you'll have some success. And you'll have people fall off simply because there are things that I don't want to pay for just because they're not enough value to me, although I may stay connected if it was free. I might. So whenever we put up a boundary, a higher wall, we're going to lose some people. That's how walls work. And it's just a matter of how low we can make that bar. So to offer whatever value I can to Christine, who I'm assuming is smart and well-read, and that's one reason why you're here is you're looking for better ideas. The principle that comes to my mind is, are you accurately relating to the prospective membership how they will grow and what they'll be offered if they commit? And the way that we make the payment steer away from the transactional is we frame it accurately as a commitment to make the community work, not payment for results. One is an internal motivated response and one is externally motivated. And if we invite people to the community for internal reasons, they want to be connected, they want to grow. And then we offer the membership in externally framed ways. Oh, if you're a member, you will get. Then we actually erode the internal motivation that's already there.
I think that's such a key distinction. And I was going to ask you more because I know there's a lot, with the membership model. And I feel like you just made that really clear. It's a different shift in mindset because you do hear to sell something, you need to share what they're going to get, period.
Yeah.
Share what they're going to get. Talk about the pain and then how you're going to fix the pain. And I do think that's a distinction to say, this is an investment into the community that you are looking for. Do you want to expand any more on that when it comes to
this is a fairly nuanced idea, and we don't have a lot of time, and I'm just afraid of giving you so little I just make you mixed up. We write more about this in the upcoming book. So I'll give you the real life example we're using in the book. My co-author Carrie volunteers for women political candidates, or rather for an organization that supports women political candidates. And so on Saturdays, she does data entry, voter data entry. It is tedious and boring. It might be the most tedious and boring thing you can do on a Saturday, but she does it. So someone who understands community as transactional would say, gee, how did those organizers get her to do really boring work on Saturday? That'd be transactional, right? How do we manipulate her to give up Saturdays and do this? But for her, it's relational. She wants to be connected with shared values and purpose, with people who have shared values and purpose, to changing the future. And when she's there, she is supporting people and physically with people who share her values and purpose. She is building a relationship with them. They're allowing her to grow and to be someone who's effective in the world, consistent with her values. That turns out what it takes is entering in data, voter data. As soon as someone says, Carrie, we love that you volunteer. We'd like you to volunteer for more Saturdays. I tell you what, we'll give you a sweatshirt every time you volunteer. They are now transitioning that relationship into a transactional. They're offering her an external reward for what she's doing from internal motivation. And what they're doing is unwittingly pushing that relationship into a commodified transactional transaction, right? Well, gee, how much does that sweatshirt worth? So you can't buy the sweatshirt. You only get it in the campaign. Well, how else can you get it? Do you have to do 8 Saturdays? Can you do 4 Saturdays? Can you do 2 hours and 1 Saturday and then do anything else, right? Whereas if they offer the sweatshirt and said, we're so happy that you're volunteering, it makes such a difference. Here, we'd like to offer you this sweatshirt that you can only get by volunteering so that you know that you're part of the team, because we're only giving it to team members. I don't know if that would inspire her to do more data entry, but they won't have eroded the internal motivation that she's bringing into the office. Because they're honoring, it's a token, right? It's a token of a relationship as opposed to a trade for results. So one of the things we have to constantly look is how are we offering value, but not making it a trade of some sort? Because then we're forcing the conversation, well, how do I maximize the value? And if you're offering me a way to maximize value and trade, then how is my internal motivation not respected or appreciated? Now, on the other side, we say, no. We totally respect your internal motivation. We totally understand you come because you want to help. We just want you to know that we'll give you more pins if you do more. Well, it doesn't work that way. Like, you've already broken the relationship at a level above 0, right? And now you got to repair it if you want to get back. So whatever the trade is, and money totally counts, it has to honor, or as we say, protect the internal motivation, the longing for growth.
Great, thank you.
I think this is probably amongst the most misunderstood and thus most toxic principles that we write about, because there's this mistaken belief that more is better. More rewards, more gift certificates, more raffle tickets, more parties, more. And of course, 1 will start eroding and 10 will just be absolutely toxic.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles. That's great. I'm conscious that I can't remember. Is it Handrich? Handrich has had his hand up for a bit, so I'd like to get him to ask his question, and then depending on how much time, we might have one more, and then we'll have to close. So please ask your question, Handrich.
Yeah. Hello, Charles and everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. So, yeah, I'm from Indonesia, and actually, I'm currently want to set up a community for social entrepreneur, and it has been done before, and I think it's not really successful. Like we have like 5 person in as a inner circle, but it's working like 1 year or 2 years. But after that, it's like they're not in the same frequency anymore. So I just wondering, can you share on when can we say that our boundary is already proper or not? Especially if we can see that the dynamic within, for example, like after it sets proper, but then it starts changing, especially when there's some more variables like opportunities coming and so on. So yeah, I'm just trying to set the second time more proper to set the community in the genuine way.
Well, so according to my understanding, we have 7 minutes here, and there's at least 3 to 10 things I want to know about what you're doing to respond appropriately. So why do you think it's not working? I'm not arguing with you, but when you say it's not working, what makes you say that?
Yeah, because at the end, after having several times, then the real agenda is start popping up. So they're not really creating things for the greater good, but yeah, for self-purpose. So, but it cannot, like you mentioned, relationship cannot be understand in just a short time, right? So that's why it's like, yeah, I can say that there's some hidden agenda, something like that.
So you're saying that members don't want to stick to the agenda that you envisioned?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's so many variables that would influence that. I don't know how to speak to that in an honest way. I can speak in the time that we have to two ideas. One is, I'm wondering how many people you're inviting to participate. I'm curious, in the last year, how many people have you invited to participate?
So basically, I'm talking about the founding team. It's 5 of them, but they have a lot of community. But before, I haven't joined the community yet. It's, I can say, like hundreds maybe, but it's like spread and not well organized. So it's like, it's a friend of the friend and a friend, but there's no, I think like what you mentioned, there should be a ritual and so on. So it is why I want to do it the second time more proper.
Well, I don't know what you mean by not organized. I totally believe you. So what occurs to me, again, we're talking for less than 10 minutes about something you spent a year on. So I just want to acknowledge it's very hard for me to tell someone who's smart and working on something for a year, things that you already know and whatnot. One of the things I'm wondering is, how are you offering value to the visitors so that they understand they're going to grow into who they want to be? Right? And I don't mean data. I mean, data is one way that we grow into who we want to be. But have you read The Art of Community by chance, Hendrik?
I read it, but not finished it yet.
Okay, well, one of the things I talk about is that there's 2 areas of growth. One, there's the internal, and the internal is the most important. So we can actually give people information or data, right? Like how to set up an organization, how to have a board meeting, how to do fundraising, how to. But the important growth is internal. And the internal growth comes from relationships, usually with elders, right? And that's how we mature. And so the question that is in my mind, and unfortunately, we don't have time to go deep in this, is how do they perceive, accurately or otherwise, that they have access to mature internally? So my guess is, in this group that I'm talking to now, and I don't know how much of a community you really are, I'm not judging that, I'm saying I don't know. My guess is, if you're voting with your time and you do have a space to share about what we call your full self, not just you related to entrepreneurship. I've lost my train of thought. So you need 2 things. So you need to have a space where you can share your full self, which is off topic, so to speak, because that's how we feel connected, is we're not talking about the agenda. But the second thing is, we need to understand how we're going to get a resource or access to a resource that'll help us grow. And in our community, I write about the fact that I participate with a lot of other filmmakers in New York. But if I got to those events and they put all the successful filmmakers in another room and said, hey, all you novices, you get to hang out here, I probably wouldn't have come back, or certainly would have come back 10 times, right? I needed to have access to elders that I thought, in this case, accurately, would help me mature into who I wanted to be, right? Now, I might have been given a lot of data if I'd been cordoned off in a cohort of like junior filmmakers, but I can get that on the internet. I can download PDFs, right? In this age, that is no longer an overwhelming value. Maybe that was big value in the 1980s. I don't know. I wasn't doing it then. So I'm just sharing that, unfortunately, we haven't had time to talk deeply, but that's a question in my mind. How are they perceiving that they have access to resources to help them mature into who they want to be? Otherwise, create a PDF library and call it a day, right?
Nice. Hopefully that's touched on some of the issues that you're struggling with, Hendrik. I
Sure,
did
thank you.
say we were going to close off, but there's one question I think this seems to be quite popular, and it's also quite relevant, I would say, to the Community Builders group. And it's around decentralizing decision making. So I think to finish off, it'd be interesting to, I don't have any examples or thoughts around where you go from just a core bunch or couple of decision makers, founders, to how do you make that empower more people to be part of that decision making process, and whether you've seen that happen in communities you work
Yeah, well, I have not personally been involved in the decentralizing those power online communities because I don't work myself in online communities. I've been working with my co-author for months in the book. We talked about the principles and best practice that she understands. And what's true in any community, and it applies to online as well, is at some critical point and size, we have to appoint people to have more authority, right? The diaconate, if you read The Art of Community, to help keep the inside safe. And also as we have inner rings to help make sure that those inner rings, serve as they ought to. And that always involves letting go of some authority from the top because we can't be everywhere all the time. And other than that, I don't think I can speak more to that specifically at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people that will demonstrate their commitment, hopefully as a result of their internal motivation, and you can invite them to have more authority. And what you're really doing is you're creating a diaconate inner ring, and you need to give them more attention, and they need to have more privileges, so that they can feel connected and supported as they do that.
I feel whether it's online or offline, I think some of these communities are both kind of a blended approach. There's the thing that springs to mind is the balance between control and consistency of how a community works, and then freedom for the members to define how the community works, if that makes sense. Is how it was born, but then how it grows and evolves.
Yeah, the most important part as you let go is to make the inside has to stay safe, right? Letting go control can't be, it's no longer safe, because then you're going to destroy the very fundamental that makes the community work. Mm-hmm. Now, what's safe is going to differ from group to group, right? But nonetheless, the principle is there. If it's not safe, then it's not going to work, whatever safe means for you. And then the second thing is that you got to remain that it's serving the purpose. Now, serving the purpose doesn't mean every word that's not pointed in the mission statement is irrelevant, because there needs to be room for members to share their full selves. Otherwise, it's not a community, right? It's just a resource. But if you ostensibly are coming together to help one another be better community builders, and what I really want to know is how to do online marketing, at some point that has to be reined in, so it doesn't become an online marketing forum. It's about building community, right? And that might mean that you create a subset, an inner ring on online marketing for community, right? But that the purpose is still served. And that may sound silly, but in that example of the outdoor adventure club, they've more or less turned into a management group for a lodge, right? Because they're not serving the purpose, right? They're not investing necessarily in building those relationships.
I think the thing that hit home for me most was your invitation to dinner. And it wasn't just about beers and pizza. It's like, do you want to join us and commit to being there for the people who come and to be available for when they need you? As well,
if we have time for that, I can elaborate a little bit to make that more clear.
Oh, if people need to go, they can go.
I have a few more minutes.
If you're happy to do that, please.
So my wife and I host a lot of events at our home because it's a safe space we invite people to. And one of the rules I have is that we strongly encourage guests to put their cell phones in a basket, and the basket goes in another room. And the only exceptions are if somebody for medical reasons needs to be on call or technical reasons has to be on call. Then we have other protocols where they can have the phone in the room, but they're not carrying it. But the reason I bring that up is it's a ritual that we've put at the beginning of our evenings where everyone participates in and sees others who vote with their hands that they're going to be in the room present with one another and not with whatever text and Facebook post that comes up. And it reinforces the idea that we are coming together for this time, and it's a special time. And my attitude, and one person said that my rules are draconian. Now, maybe he's right. I think there was a lot of hyperbole there. It was in the invitation that we sequester cell phones, and everybody else sequestered the phones. And I think, part of the problem is there's addiction there going on there. But I'm at a place in my life where if you come to my home from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock for dinner, and you were alerted in the invitation what was going to happen, and you don't have an emergency reason to have your phone, and you don't want to give up your phone from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock with other people who've done the same thing to connect with people in the room, I really don't want you to be here. There's a million places you could go. They're called bars, and you can keep your cell phone, and you can do whatever they do at bars. But I don't have a bar, right? We're having a place where people can connect. Now, we might change that rule at some time, and that might be a rule that will keep people out that I'd like to participate. But this idea is that I'm making it really clear why we're coming together so that people can participate fully or choose not to is really important.
Nice. Excellent. Well, so there's a lot there around intention, boundaries, clarity, commitment. And if only we had you for the whole day. But
well, maybe that's a workshop you can create, and then we can get really deep into more than one area without all the superficiality. Since our time is ending, I just want to mention the Vogl community exists. Obviously, Carlos has mentioned it. I have 2 books coming out in the next year and month or so. And for those of you who are interested in my work, if you go to charlesvogl.com and you sign up for the email list, preview copies of the book will be sent out digitally to people who have already expressed explicit interest in what I'm doing. I don't do this to sell books. I do this because I'm trying to change the world, because it's a lonely, lonely, lonely place, and it's getting worse. And so if you're interested in getting better at connecting people, that's really exciting to me. And that's quite frankly why I give away preview digital copies of the book, because I want to help the people who are already doing this. And then if it's any good, you'll decide if you want to tell other people the book exists. So just know that that's an option. And then lastly, there are worksheets on my work site that are free for download. And if they're helpful with you or anybody you're working with to just help the conversation, connecting people get stronger faster, then they're always there for free. And that's what I got to say about that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Charles. That's excellent. Sasha, you wanted to say something as well?
Yes. Thanks for being here with us and sharing your time. That was really amazing. And I typed up some notes. We have the resources in there too. We'll share that with the rest of the group. And also, I just wanted to mention another community builder friend and I, Erica, are teaching a class over the summer in New York City around the idea of products and community. It's a summer intensive. I believe it's 5 weeks long in July. And it's on the sign up. I'll also post it in the group. So that class is there if anybody's in New York and wants to join. And I was just thinking, Charles, if you're free, maybe in New York by any chance, and you want to stop by, it would be really great to have you as sort of a guest in the class, because I feel like you would have a lot to add, obviously, to this whole topic.
I don't have any plans to be in July in New York. I'm actually finishing the Fall Harvest community this summer. And so we've cleared off a lot of travel for that. Okay. But there may be possible for a Zoom call with a class if that is helpful.
Well, that would be great too. Yeah, we would love that. That would be really awesome. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you very much, Charles. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call. For those of you with your videos on, please give us a wave. Yay!
Thanks, Charles.
All right, thanks a lot. And yes, well, see you next month. We will be talking to Casper to Kyle, and we'll be carrying on this theme about bringing people together in an authentic way, and we'll gain Casper's his perspective on how this works. Look out on the Facebook group for more information about that webinar, and also if you're not familiar with Casper, his work, I think there's a report, Care of Souls, and also How We Gather, 2 very interesting bits of information there for you about, again, how to create more authentic connection in communities. So Thank you very much, everyone. And
Thanks,
thank you again,
Charles.
Charles. Really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.